Hey guys, welcome back to another Chatters episode. Great to have you here. Amy, how are you out of 10?
The answer is 4.
Why?
No, I'm 8 out of 10. Blair and his little cheeky. One day I'm going to actually release these little things you keep saying before we record.
Don't do that one.
And I had one for you today.
Did you?
I was going to say Happy Valentine's Day.
Oh yeah, Happy Valentine's Day to you too.
Did you remember?
I remembered that it was a thing. I remembered what it was.
It's today. Happy Valentine's Day, babe.
Yeah, you too.
We are not Valentine's Day people,
we're not.
unfortunately.
We're not. Well, not really, unfortunately.
Well, is it?
Cool. This is a conversation that we need to have. No. Great. Thank you guys for tuning in. Amy, how you out of 10?
8. Yeah,
Yep.
I'd say 8. What about you?
Cool. I reckon I'm a 9.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I actually thought I was going to be lower, like, you know, when you go to bed. So we went to bed kind of late last night.
Why did we go to bed late?
Yeah, that's what I was going to explain. Like, because that's why I thought I'd be lower, but I'm actually kind of chipper. But maybe
That's good.
Maybe a little bit lower because our toddler really struggled to go to.
You had a hard drop off, so I'm surprised.
Yeah. So that was hard. So our toddler just didn't want to go to daycare today. He was really upset. But last night we just finished the TV series Narcos.
Well, we finished the first two
seasons, sorry. And so we went and we were looking up information about it because it's based on a true story. And I clicked on this one link.
Oh yeah.
And what were you thinking I was going to talk about?
I was just going to talk about how you're so hooked on Narcos that you keep.
Oh yeah, that's one thing. Is like I've struggled to go to bed because I'm like I need to know what happens.
What happens?
But I clicked on this one link and then my phone looked like because my phone was under attack. Okay. So I closed it all down, shut the phone off, and then got this like malware checker thing, and
everything was fine.
Look, that's fine. Yeah. But anyway, when you freak out.
Just a little PSA. Was it McCafe?
PSA?
Public service announcement.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Is it McCafe? No, it's not McCafe. We were laughing about how that sounds like McCafe, like the McDonald's cafe. MCAFFEE or something like that. The malware.
Yeah. Checkout thing.
That thing. If you have a random pop-up and you don't actually have that installed on your phone, there apparently is a scam where they pop it up pretending to be that thing. And I think that is maybe what happened.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. It might not even be an actual thing.
Something. And so you clicked block and then it went and freaked out. Yeah. Anyway, that's fine. We're okay for now.
We made it.
We'll find out probably what happens with that down the track. But hopefully it's all good. Well, welcome back to Honey, We Need a Chat. This is our Chit Chat episode. If you don't know what Chit Chat episodes are, these are the episodes in between the full episodes where we discuss a topic or something we're working on, and it's a little more practical and a little more applicable to where we're at as a couple or something that we find really important in relationships. So today you get to chit chat with us. This season, we want to be really intentional with not just being a podcast. We're really aware that there's so many voices out there. There's so many voices in the podcast space, in the information space, in the relationship space. And that's great. There's so much information for you to be consuming, to be learning and growing. I find myself putting a podcast in, listening to it, and then I take my headphones out and then I go about my day and it kind of goes out my mind. And so every now and then there'll be a nugget and I'm like, yes, that's so great. And it'll actually impact my life. But for the most part, I'm consuming content all the time, very quickly, very fast paced. And we're not doing this podcast for the sake of just being a voice you hear and blah, blah, blah. We want to actually be challenging people's real life relationships and strengthening people's real life relationships. And we're strengthening and challenging our own relationship through this process. And so we've been trying to brainstorm how we can introduce elements to the podcast that are immediately applicable to people if they want to, that people can take on a challenge or take on a practical thing immediately in that day to even just gently test out how things are going or how they can go. So we're introducing a new segment at the end of the episode. Stick around for that. It's going to be called the Reality Check Corner. And it's all about how we can take what we're talking about and immediately implement it in easy, manageable, not huge, big, long ways. Because that's the other thing for me is I'm like, I don't have time to be implementing this big 5-step process or anything like that. So just quick, palatable implementation ways so that it's not just a thing you've heard and you're moving on throughout your day. It's a thing you've heard and you're challenging yourself that day to put things in practice. So listen out for that. And today we're going to be talking about something called communication loops. Communicado loops, even some people might say. So we're going to talk about some of the things that you might see repeating in your relationship, if you keep finding that you have the same argument or the same conversation, you keep getting stuck in the same patterns, or even the unspoken arguments or the unspoken disagreements, unspoken patterns that you just keep coming back to. That's what we're discussing today. We're discussing what they might be, and we're discussing ways that can help you break out of those communication loops, because you don't have to stay in those loops for the rest of your relationship.
No, you don't.
Which is the encouraging thing. We've also got a really interesting story that I stumbled upon this week that was really encouraging to me. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Stay tuned for that. Just how much relationships can turn around. And I think we have a bit of a, I don't know, I think maybe we have a little bit of like a give up mentality. I don't know what the official phrase is with stuff like this. When we find ourselves really deeply stuck in the same patterns over and over, I think it's really easy to just be like, it's never going to get better. This is how it is, and not really put time into being intentional to bring it around. And I genuinely believe with all of my heart, and we've seen it in our relationship, that you can work through those times where you're stuck. It's not just a matter of like, this is how we are now and we're never going to get through that. So this is an encouraging episode. This is an episode to encourage you that if you found yourself in these patterns, these things can shift. And it's really important to be putting intentionality behind it. Blair doesn't know much about these communication loops.
No,
so I'm going to step you through what they might be and how you might find yourself in one. So let's begin.
Let's do it.
So communication loops happen when couples repeatedly get stuck in the same argument, conversation, emotional pattern. Internal conversation is my little add to that as well, without resolution. They're finding themselves in the same patterns of interacting all the time. So spoken loops, you might find out loud arguments you might find you're having is like the same fights about money, parenting, intimacy, chores, those kinds of things. Those classic arguments that just come around and around in relationships. Things that you're like, at the very beginning, you're like, oh, we don't see eye to eye on this, or we don't do these things the same way. And so they just kind of sit in the back burner, and then they come back as you go. And they don't really fix themselves. They just kind of sit out of sight. And then all of a sudden it'll come up again when there's a financial strain or something like that. Another one is a partner who always shuts down, and we've spoken about stonewalling. So it would be the same kind of thing. If there's a pattern in your relationship where one partner is always shutting down, or both partners are shutting down. And so the communication loop is that you can't communicate through it because there's a stonewalling element to it. You're shutting down and you're not engaging with it. Or there's one who pushes really hard to have that conversation. So like, especially if you've got one person shutting down and another like hounder, is that the word, hounding? And they're just like constantly pushing at the same thing. Like, we need to talk about this, or pushing their side. That can be a communication loop as well. And apologizing just to end the fight, which is a really interesting one, is also a communication loop, because if you're just apologizing to appease me because I'm upset about something, that doesn't actually bring resolution. It's a fake resolution, and it can look peaceful. And especially depending on how the person does it, it can look like, oh, we got a resolution. It's not really, because you're not internally, you haven't come around. You haven't got resolution and closure in that space. You've just been like, all right, whatever. I'm sorry. Yep. I won't do it again. And that's not healthy. And it's not actually communicating. It's just a fake, shiny, nice looking thing on the outside. So there's also unspoken, like I said, silent loops. And this one I think is something I really wanted to add into this conversation, because I fall into these things all the time. My internal world is very loud. And so I'm constantly internally processing, as we spoke about recently. I think it was on our Chatters episode. A lot of the time you're like, I don't know what's going on in your head. Because we asked the question of like, on Chatters, we were saying, what would you like to know?
On our Patreon episodes. Yeah.
What would you like to know about the other gender? And you're like, I want to know how your brain works, because a lot of the time I don't know what's going on. And that's really, for me, my internal world is very loud. And so you can have internal unspoken loops that you get stuck in. So things like, I already know how they're going to react, so I'm not even going to go there. I already know what they'll say. I'm not even going to go there because I can't be bothered navigating that. And I think a lot of the time that's based on fact, like as in based on experience. So you may actually know they often react this way. But even when it's based on experience, it's a very limiting thing to be like, I know how they're going to react. It's not worth it, because you're not giving them the benefit of the doubt, but you're also not allowing yourself to process what you need and stand up for what you need, or feel free in your relationship to have a voice. And you're also not letting and then you're like carrying the bitterness towards them unfairly because you haven't actually let them have a voice in that either. So that's a really common one. I already know how they're going to react, so you don't bring it up. The secret resentment cycle is another one where you're irritated at your partner and you don't actually say anything. And if I'm honest, this is what I've found. Resentment's a strong word, but this is what I find myself falling into. Like if I get hurt by something or irritated by something, I won't say it, partially because I grew up with this like really strong desire to not rock the boat. And I don't want to say that. And I've spoken about that on here before.
Yeah.
So then, but instead it doesn't go away. Like the thing that's hurt me or whatever, or that sits badly with me or that's irritated me, whatever it might be, doesn't go away. It just sits there. And so then it's like this, like it just builds and snowballs into lots of things. And a lot of the time we've found that when we have a conversation, well, I've found when I've had a conversation with you about the thing that's irritating me, all the other little pieces just fall away.
Yeah.
And it's not as big of a deal as I thought it was. When you like sit there in this resentment cycle, it builds and builds and it starts to encompass everything. And then the reality is not everything is encompassed in that. So that's also an unspoken loop you might find yourself in.
So if you can hear this background noise, our golden retriever is very upset with us because it's raining this morning and we didn't take her for a walk. So she's brought a little toy pig in and she's chomping away at it. She's eating
the squeaker, so that's helpful because at least she's not. She's also playing the guitar with her tail. Don't hit me.
I can go out there. Ow.
Oh, now she's just going to keep going. The mental scorecard game is another internal loop that might happen. And I think, again, this is one a lot of people do without maybe realizing it. And it's tracking everything you do versus what they do, but never voicing it. And I think there's like this reel that, it's not even one reel. So many people have made this reel where it's like when I decide I'm going to go off my phone and be present and I put my phone down and then I just stare at my husband who's on his phone or something like that. It's such a like classic issue. Like all of a sudden I'm like, I've been on my phone too much. I'm going to put this down. And then they're still on their phone. And so it's like, oh,
you're still on your phone, judging.
Look at you, just always on your phone. And I feel like that is such a constant thing in relationships. Like I did this and this, and then look at what you're doing sort of thing. And just even when you're not trying to be conscious, like you're not trying to score it up, you do have a score of these things. And we've had conversations. I can't think about the topics that we've had it, but I know we've had conversations where we're like, I've been doing this and you haven't, or something like that. And then the other person's like, I've been doing that and you haven't. And it's just wild because perception is crazy. Like you interpret things so differently. It's crazy. Anyway, that's one other loop. And then the last internal unspoken loop is the avoidance habit, which is choosing silence over potential conflict. And this is similar to, I already know how they'll react, and also stonewalling. And this is definitely something that I've had to work on just in general. Instead of actually tackling the issue or the disagreement or the unnoticed thing, you just choose to be silent and not. But that, again, is just going to build resentment. All of these things are loops we find ourselves in. And the reason we find them in, the reason we find ourselves in those loops could be a variety of things. It could be that you've had really bad experiences growing up. Could be that you've had bad experiences in your relationship. Could be that you just haven't ever learned how to communicate well. There's a lot of reasons for it. And I think a lot of couples would have communication loops that they have in their relationship. But I think it's really important to identify what loops you might have so that you can then do some things to counteract them when you're communicating.
I think it's identify, but also, again, we've mentioned before about having that intentionality and that commitment to it. So we hear a lot of, one side of the couple, how do you say that? Like one person in the couple, one partner, like wants to address these things or talk through these things, and the other person's either not really willing to see it or recognize it, or just not really committing to it. And that can be quite hard. Of like, well, I'm there's no interest from your side. I'm carrying all the weight here. I'm wanting to do something. There's a number of different things that can feed into that, and we won't go into all of them because we're not experts in this space, but just from what people have been sharing with us. But one big thing is, again, how do we bring it up with our partner? And like, I think sometimes, we've both fallen into the category, like onto the trap of saying, you need to do this more, you need to do that more, rather than, again, having that 5-year plan, right? Like that 5-year vision that you did a little while ago about where do you want to see yourself in 5 years? Where do you want to see that relationship in 5 years? So having an intentional night like that, like an intentional date night at home to set the tone and to explore that, I think is a really a good way to start the conversation and try and get you both on board, because it'll be very rare for someone to just not want to do that at all. A lot of guys need permission and a safe space to explore that rather than feeling critiqued and judged. And likewise, same with women as well. But I'm just a guy and I speak more to guys, so I can only come from that perspective. But yeah, I think setting the tone is really important, because it's one thing to identify these things. Yeah. It's another thing to commit to doing it and you guys being on the same page with addressing those things.
Yeah. And if you've just listened to this bunch of like communication loops and been like, oh, that's what my partner does. Yeah. You're falling into one of these communication loops where you're constantly projecting and not necessarily reflecting on what you're bringing to the conversation. So that's giving you your answer of maybe one of your conversation loops. Can you explain just really quickly what the 5-year plan thing was, just like briefly, so in case anyone hasn't heard that?
Absolutely. So what Amy did we did it on an episode? I think we did it on a Chatters episode.
Might have been Chatters.
Also, just a quick plug to Patreon. If you're wanting to dig deeper onto the topics that we talk about, we do that on our chatters. We do that as a community of people just wanting to explore and to encourage and to unpack these things and sort of give tips to each other and stuff like that too. So jump over onto our Patreon and join that awesome community over there. Essentially what we did was we sat down and you just map it out. Like, did you get me to close my eyes? I think it was.
Yeah, and we're actually going to do something like this at the end of the episode too. So awesome. So stay tuned.
So close my eyes and it's like, well, like picture 5 years time, where do I see myself in terms of my career, my family, my house, my location? Like there's a bunch of different things. And so writing that down and then asking the question, well, what do I need to do to get there? And that really helps with our conversation. It's like, well, where do I see our marriage in 5 years time? It's like, so putting all of those things in there and how that all fit in together was actually a really fun exercise and helping with clarity and prioritizing and seeing, actually, I am putting my work above my family sometimes or vice versa. Well, which is not a bad thing. But it's just like, just that balance and everything. It just helps you get that bit more of a picture of what you're aiming towards and where you're at in terms of that goal.
Yeah. And what is so wild to me is that like if you were in people in their careers, people in businesses, people that are starting up projects, whatever it might be, you do this, like you strategize, you have a vision you're working towards, you're clear on it, you reassess it if it's not working. There's like, what is it, KPIs that you're checking along the way to make sure you're going okay. But for some reason, in the most important relationship of your life, the thing that is the foundation to how you're doing in your career, how you're doing in every other area of your life, we don't do that. Yeah. Like it's just like, we just think you get married or you get together and you just coast. That's not how things happen. That's not how you get stronger. I think there's a misconception that if you need to put work in, then it's not right. That's not true at all.
In so many workplaces as well, they do like team building exercises. They do like personality tests to work out how that works within the team. So there's a lot of
professionals come in to talk.
Exactly.
To them.
Yeah, you go upskilling workshops and all this sort of stuff, which help. But in marriages or relationships,
so often we don't.
It's a second thing. We put more priority on our work growth rather than our relationship.
Yeah, and if we can get that time in, cool. But if we're not going to really go out of our way to make it work. I'm too tired
for it. Again, it just drops the priority down. And Bonnie, I do not want your slobbery pig.
Your slobbery pig. You're bored. Cool. So these communication loops are damaging. They're dangerous for obvious reasons. They might not feel dangerous. And that's why we're addressing this now, because I think a lot of these things can feel super innocent or not that big of a deal. The issue is, like you've just said, 5-10 years down the track, these little separations that you have now, these little moments that are not being worked on, they're going to become big gaps down the track. And unless you put that intentional time in, yes, it might feel like a small thing that this is the loop you're stuck in, or that this is the thing you can't raise with your partner because you know how they're going to react. But in 5 years' time, it's not going to feel so small. In 10 years' time, it's not going to feel so small. So that's why it's important to adjust these things now. These things are dangerous because they might make problems feel unsolvable, which creates distance. So you feel like we can't get over this thing. We can't deal with this problem. There's this topic that just we've never been able to solve this topic, so we just avoid it. So it can start to feel, again, slowly at the beginning, it can start to feel unsolvable, which just causes distance down the track. They reinforce negative assumptions, like they don't care, they never listen. I don't know how many times I have thought about, I've either been in conversation with people or I've seen people talking, or on Reddit all the time, but also within our relationship unknowingly to myself. I think you should know the thing. And so often there's a foundational little key missing, which is they don't really understand what this means to you. You haven't really communicated this super clearly. Doesn't take the ownership off the other person. Doesn't mean that what you've done isn't a negative thing. But until I explain to you what it means to me and why it's important or why it's hurt me, or just give you that context, it's not fair for me to assume that you know. So many times that little key is missing. We talked about that with Bryce in our last full episode. People that just assume that's what all the rom-coms are based off.
Yeah.
That's what horror movies are based off. Like, that's why there's stories in those places, is because people assume. And so it just reinforces negative assumptions. These communication loops, like, they don't care. They don't listen. They never change. They're just going to be this way forever. That's not necessarily true. I think a lot of the time we haven't put the effort in to try and see if it can change, if they do care, or given them the benefit of the doubt. It also keeps both partners stuck in old roles and reinforces that so that no one's growing. And especially if there's like a bitterness between what's being done in the house, for example, not communicating properly, having a communication loop around this is just going to keep those people stuck in those places and then reinforce it, which will then cause more communication issues down the track, more hurt down the track. And it doesn't allow space for either party to grow. I think another thing that I've wrestled with growing up is, so my father was a beautiful man, but he had some very intense quirks about him, and there's a lot of mental health stuff going in, but I used to work so hard to make sure that nothing rocked his boat. Like, I didn't want him to get upset. I didn't want him to be put out, because I was stressed about how he would react. And I came to this realization when I was a young adult and I was stressed about it. I was like, if I keep fixing this for him, or if I keep avoiding this for him, he doesn't have the opportunity to grow. Like, I'm actually impacting his opportunity to grow. He's still responsible for that, but I'm not responsible for making it so that he doesn't have to deal with that thing. And I think in relationships, we can find ourselves in that place too. Like, I don't want to put them out, or I don't want to get them upset, or they don't react well when I say this, so I don't want to say it to them. And we are not responsible for making sure that our partners don't have to face the difficulties.
That carried across into our marriage as well, and our relationship. And you've worked really hard on that. In our first episode back for this season, you shared that about, during our busy time with between the season breaks, about how you would shut down and you wouldn't say what you needed to say because you didn't want to rock the boat, or you didn't want to get me offside, or whatever else. And then in that time, it helps because your patience was a lot less. And so you're like, no, I have to say this, because it wasn't even just a matter of I need to get better at saying stuff. If you didn't say it, it would have affected you 10 times more.
I didn't have capacity.
Exactly. Yeah. So it would have like really weighed on you way more. So you've had to work on that quite a lot. And I think that's quite an important process, process. I'll stick with it, of, what are we bringing into our relationships? Like, what are past hurts, past experiences, and whatever else. And that's where self-reflecting is extremely important. Absolutely. Like journaling and sitting down, and use ChatGPT to help ask a bunch of questions to help you explore that. What are the stuff that you're bringing into the relationship that you don't want to? And that might be causing hurt and whatever else. Because again, like you mentioned before as well, if we're only focusing on the negatives of our partners and not reflecting enough on ourselves, like that, it can be very damaging as well.
Absolutely. And if you're finding these patterns are repeating, one good way, and maybe semi-neutral way to go about the conversation, is to explore why your partner reacts that way, or even more importantly, why you react that way. So having a curiosity about what it is that's in the past for yourself and for your partner that has meant that these patterns come in can be a gentle way to start that conversation, or to start that exploration, because we don't just randomly pop up like this the way that we are. We're the way that we are because of our experiences and our personality and our insecurities and all the things that play into that. And there's reasons for those things. So when you can explore that together, you get closer, and you understand yourself better. You understand your partner better. You have a whole bunch more grace for how they might be navigating things. And it's a good activity for you guys to be connecting. So these are all the things, these are all the reasons why these communication loops are dangerous. Everyone has communication loops. Just to clarify, like, if you've been listening to this and you're like, oh, we've got these, everyone has it, but we don't have to be stuck in these. And I think this is so important. We do not have to be stuck in these. And as we said with business and workplaces and all these things, we assess and we change and we pivot and we put processes in place and we bring in who we need to bring in to make those changes. And it's the same thing here. You assess, you pivot, you be like, okay, this hasn't worked for us. Let's change it and project yourselves 5-10 years down the track. Where do we want to be? Do we want to be like this, but worse? Nope. Cool. Well, then we need to actually change. It's not going to change itself. We need to actually put things in place to change it. I'm so encouraged by this story that I heard last week because it's a perfect example of this happening. You see change happen on small scales all the time, and hopefully within your own relationship, you've seen that as well. But I heard this story last week about someone that she's been really struggling in her marriage, and to the point where she was at the point like talking to her friends about like, I don't know if I should stay with him. Like it's so rough. Like he's very busy with work, difficult in-law relationships, and he does not help around the house. She's carrying all the weight of the house. She's also carrying all the weight of this difficult relationship with his parents. And he's not like, intervening there, helping, supporting there. She's far away from her support network. She doesn't even like what they're doing for work, where they are, like all these things, like pretty dire, horrible things. And fair enough to be at the point where she's like, I don't know. And she's even communicated with him before, about these things like, this isn't long-term. We can't sustain this. This is not good. I can't stay doing all of these things. I can't be alone in this and all this stuff, like really dire position. And so she was really at the point where like, I don't know, I feel empty. Don't know what the future is going to be. I don't know if I should just leave. Like, I don't know what should happen. And she went and visited her mom and stayed with her mom for a little while. And while she was there, she said to her, look, I'm really thinking about leaving. Like, I don't know what to do. And her mom just like stopped and was like calm. And she's like, you know what? I think you need to spend some time appreciating what your husband's given you and appreciating who he is. And so when I heard this story, I was like, that's a bit of a slap in the face.
Yeah,
like, he hasn't done much to deserve that necessarily. Yeah. But I was really encouraged because she said that whole, like, the whole month after that, her relationships just turned around. She spent time being like, okay, actually, he's given a lot to our family. He's given me these kids. He's given me a life I never could have dreamt of. He works very hard. He has to navigate these difficult dynamics with his family and me. And instead of focusing on all the things he wasn't doing, she spent time focusing on the things he had given her and he was doing. And also things that he was, like the things about him that she loved and the things that she couldn't even see anymore because she was so stuck in this place of desperation, which is fair enough. And what was crazy was when she started to focus on those things, her mood lifted and something has shifted. And now her husband has just like come back alive as well. He's engaged with the family. They're like in such a good place. And I don't tell this story because I think if you change your attitude, your partner is suddenly going to become a good person. No. And I also don't say this because if you're struggling with all those things I just listed, it just means you should change your attitude. Yeah. And that's magically going to get better. That doesn't happen that way all the time. But I was encouraged by this because when we navigate these communication loops, there are so many layers to them. Yeah. It's easy for me as someone hearing that story to think that husband is horrible. Yeah. That situation is horrible and she really should leave because I'm hearing it from one perspective. And also because I'm seeing it like 2D. Yeah, I'm not living it. But to see how much changing her attitude shifted it for her alone was super encouraging because regardless of how things turned out, regardless of how her relationship landed, it's still incredible for her to be able to have processed those things. And gratitude is a huge tool. Yeah. It's a huge tool. Taking space, taking a pause is a huge tool in constructive approach to everything.
I think that's big too, because like hearing that, I'm like, oh, straight away my mind is like, oh man, there's going to be some listeners like for that story to be like, so you're saying that she needs to be grateful, like, and I think just to clarify, what you're saying is that if we only focus on the negatives, we're going to focus on the negative. So not to roll over and accept the bad treatments that you get. That's not what you're talking about. What you're talking about is like, all right, if you actually want to make this work, if you haven't been able to identify the goodness from that person, focus on that for a bit. Like explore that. Like, how am I just like now looking at you, for example, if we made this more relatable, am I looking at you and just identifying all the things I struggle with? If that was the case, I would get so toxic so fast and I would struggle with you so much. Yeah, what you're saying is if you focus on the good as well, like have a good focus there, it does really, really shift our approach to the circumstance, to the relationship, and it helps you actually assess it properly rather than if you're only focusing on the negative, it's going to be a negative relationship. Yeah. If you can see the positive in it and it outweighs the negative and it's still healthy, that's great.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know this person well enough to know the intricacies of how accurate her story side is versus his story side or any of those things. And I'm not even going to try and pretend like I could make that up, but exactly what you've said, you shifting your approach to things, being stuck in that place where you cannot find a different perspective or you can't find gratitude or you can't find space even mentally means you're stuck in a loop. You're stuck in some kind of loop, either a deeply hurt loop because of literal things that have happened to you or this built up loop that we talked about earlier where everything is snowballing and actually not everything is as bad as it seems, but there's like a big communication gap from something that you've worked on. There was a few things I loved about it. One was she changed it for herself. She didn't change it for him. And then he's stepped up to the plate. So obviously something is healing in how they're communicating now, which is beautiful. She changed it for herself, which she deserves to change it for herself, regardless of the outcome. Because who wants to go through this horrible situation, not have it be a positive outcome in the end, and then also have all this built up resentment, this clogged up mental space going on. Like you being able to work on those things is so beneficial for yourself and for your kids and for the people around you, regardless of if the outcome's what you want it to be. The other thing I loved was that her mum like encouraged her to take a pause and reflect. And it would be so easy as a mum, like hearing this story, I would be like, yeah, leave him. How dare him? Like
you deserve so much better.
Yeah, exactly. Which obviously we're going to feel that about the people that we love. But I love that she was like, you take this time and pause and reflect. I think that's so healthy and constructive, again, regardless of the outcome. But the real reason I want to share this story is this is an example of how relationships can turn around. Like you can see, this is an extreme example and a very quick example, but you can see massive change in relationships by just putting little places and things in place. And you do not have to be stuck in the same loops going forward. So we're going to talk a little bit about some tips on how we might navigate switching some of these communication loops.
Absolutely. So first one, and Amy's going to explain them. I'm going to read the titles because I have a special role. Pause and reflect before reacting. Yeah.
So this is a really straightforward one. And we've spoken about this before, I think, taking some time before you react. Pausing and reflecting before you react, especially if you feel like the argument's brewing. If it's a communication loop and you can feel it brewing, you're like, no, here we go. Here's a loop. Taking a second to pause and reflect before diving right in to that loop and asking yourself, what's my pattern here? That's really important too. I can feel this pattern coming back. What's my pattern in this pattern? And just reflecting before you respond. An example is, do I always get defensive or do I always shut down? Just taking that time to reflect before you just jump right into the pattern again, because breaking a loop is done very simply by pausing, not letting it just keep going like this, pausing and reflecting before you keep going.
Yeah. I think the last episode we spoke about like taking that 5-second breath before reacting. So it's like, right.
Yeah. We were talking about knowing what your partner wants.
Yeah. So taking a 5-second pause before, that's right. In fix it mode.
Yeah. Fix it mode.
So for me, rather than going straight into fix it mode when you're trying to share something with me, I take that 5-second pause to think through like, all right, what is needed for me in this situation? And the response is usually asking the question, how do you want me to respond in this situation? The second tip is change the script.
Yeah. So similarly to the first one, but if you always respond in the same way, then change it up. I think the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And it's the same thing here. If you keep finding the same loop happening over and over, change it. Like change up how you react. And so change how you respond. An example is saying, instead of saying you never listen, try saying, I really need to feel heard right now. And I love that shift. I feel like that's such a small shift for the same story. Like it's the same point you're making, but in a gentle way that is like a bit more enabling.
Number 3 is Bonnie just moved these dot points for me. She just wants attention. Try the thankfulness reset.
Yeah. So like we spoke about in that story earlier, trying to appreciate your partner. So write down 3 things you appreciate about your partner every day for a week. I've done this challenge before As I said, it wasn't with Blair, but it was really helpful. It was because if you can't find gratitude, and gratitude is helpful for the other person in terms of you've got a more gentle approach and you're appreciating them. Yes, I feel like it can be misunderstood to be all about the other person. It's actually really important for your body. Resentment or lack of gratitude in your body causes physical changes, causes physical damage. So it's really important for you and for your own mental health to be finding gratitude. If you're finding yourself not being able to interact with your partner in a way that is grateful for anything, who you are, who they are, where you're at, whatever that is, trying a thankfulness reset and genuinely every day trying to note down things you're thankful for can be really important for switching that up. And noticing the good actually changes how you interact with them. And like we said, these communication loops and relationships are layered. So yes, they may be doing some really not helpful things in a relationship, but there are so many layers to how you're interacting. And if your noticing of the good changes how you interact with them, you have no idea what the on-flow could be from that.
Next one is, and I love this one, we say this a lot, but ask a curiosity question instead of assuming.
Straightforward.
Have an attitude of curiosity,
always, in everything.
And we say this, we repeat this quite a lot. So if I'm struggling with something, like, you ask me a question of like, well, what are you thinking? What are you going? Like, it's a lot more than accusing as well. So it's this is assuming, which I think is good too, because I think a lot of the time, right? Like I'll like, if I feel like you're low or something, I'll be like, she's low. I can't talk about it. She doesn't want to talk about it. She just wants me to be quiet. Like, if I leave you in that space, and then you're probably thinking, why isn't he asking me any questions? Yeah. Why isn't he caring in this way? Why isn't he curious in this way? Why isn't he engaging? So having an attitude of curiosity. So for example, I had a conversation with someone recently where their partner is disconnecting quite a lot at home, and it's like, all right, cool. Well, like, and again, it's just assumptions. They don't care. They don't want this. They don't want that. But I'm like, I can guarantee there's something a lot more going on for them than they just just don't want to be there. Like that's not from my perspective what it would be, but we don't know until we ask.
Yeah, exactly. And like we spoke about earlier, the curiosity behind why you interact these ways. This is the example that we've got here is, can you help me understand why this is important to you? Understanding what motivates or what brings your partner and or you, most importantly you actually, to that place is really important, and can be a really nice, easy way of kind of easing into that conversation rather than like, you always do this or something like that. Yeah. So
in a different sense too, like I've actually started doing this with my boss, right? So he'll give me a task or something. I'm like, I don't really get it. And a lot of times, like I would go away. I'm like, cool. I'll say, all right, I heard you. And they go and do it. I'm like, I don't know what to do. Is this what he wants? And I'm spending more time trying to figure out if I'm doing what he wants me to do rather than clarifying that from the beginning. So I asked the question of like, all right, so just so I get it, what is the purpose of this? Like, why are you wanting this? So he's telling me what he's wanting, but I need to find out why he's wanting it. And that's really shifted my confidence in what I'm doing too. Because a lot of guys as well, they share about how, I'm doing what they've said and it's not enough. It's not enough. And it's like, I think we miss the why. Yeah. Like, why do they want that to be done? Why is your partner actually asking that of you? Maybe they're feeling neglected in some way. Maybe it's like the mental load stuff they're feeling. And there's a lot of things in that place. So asking, and not in a smart way, like don't be like, oh, why? Why do I need to do it? Yeah. But like, no, genuinely, like just so I hear you correctly, because I want to do that. Like, why is this important to you? Because it might be obvious. It probably should be obvious, but for me, it's not. And I think that's probably another big thing too. And I'm going to finish this rant very, very quickly. But for a lot of guys, if they feel like, so sometimes, and again, probably women too, but I can't speak from that perspective. If you came to me, Amy, and you said, I want you to do this, and I'd ask you why, and your attitude is, you should know, you should know this, that's going to throw me straight away because it's going to make me feel dumb, right? And it probably is dumb. I probably should know this, but the fact is that I don't. And what's more important is that, and that's a question, what is more important in this scenario? Is that you make me feel dumb and you just disgusted in me, roll your eyes, all that response, or the fact that we actually deal with the situation that's at hand, what I mean? Like, that's the more important thing. So for you giving me that space to ask that question and to be dumb, and to be vulnerable is really important. For me to ask that question, to truly understand what it is that you're wanting from this, rather than for me to just do a task. You know, if I didn't do dishes and you said to me, can you just do dishes? Well, that's not, the dishes aren't the end of it. You know what I mean? I'll start doing dishes, but then you'd be cranky about something, not that you do this, but you might be cranky about something else, right? And be like, I'm doing all the things that you're asking. What do you want from me on this?
Like the mental load. That would be the answer. Yeah. Like
it'd be mental load.
It's why do I have to tell you every time that you need to do these things?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's so true. And the question of, instead of being like, you should know this, like, what do you want out of the situation? What's the result that you want? Is the result that you want your partner to be like, I should have known those things. I don't know these things and I should know them. Or is the result that you want that you guys get closer? And I think that tiny shift in mentality can be huge.
Yeah. And I can be like very real here. I did not know how to treat women for the longest time. And I'm still learning, obviously, but it honestly, there was something that triggered for me. I was like, you know, I was so clueless. I hurt women. I offended women. I was inappropriate with women because I just did not get it. I didn't know what I didn't know. Like, I didn't know that it was wrong. I didn't know that it was, you know, you don't do that. And it really took. And so for me, a big shift was happening. I was listening to this sermon series on Song of Solomon's in the Bible, and it's really about marriage, and this couple is really freaky deaky stuff in there too, but you know, and it just shifted, and it was so apparent to me how little I knew, and that just was the start of my wanting to know. Like, I'm like, I don't want to be like this guy. I want to be the best husband I can be. I want to be the best partner I can be. I want to be the best dad, all that sort of stuff. And that was the setting of my trajectory to get better. Like, you know, again, long way to go still, but for the guys that are listening, like, I think it's one thing is like, all right, just be aware that you don't know. It's okay if you're aware that you don't know and you want to do something about it. It's not okay for you to sit in ignorance and not like assess that and look at that and look at yourself in that way and be willing to actually improve. That's what's probably not okay. But just wanted to put that out there. I don't want to be coming in preaching at this of like, you should do this sort of stuff. There was a time where I was absolutely terrible. Like, I have shame around this area of my past. And so I just want to put that out there for those that are listening and might feel similar.
Yeah. And I think on a like even broader scale, all of us don't know what we're doing until we are doing it.
Yeah.
So I think especially in marriages or relationships where like I feel like girls are just raised, as we've spoken about before, generally speaking, to be a little more emotionally connected and a little bit more emotionally like tied to how family dynamics go. Also, generally speaking, raised a little bit more aware of things that need to be done around the house, or like, I don't know, there's just something in how girls are raised versus boys are raised.
I think it's this change, and I think this culture is changing.
It is changing,
but back in the day, I mean, because we inherit all those things, right? So back in the day, like, the men would go to work, that was their job. Women would stay home, that was their job back in the day. And now that's shifting. That takes time for that culture to shift, because we see, like, we naturally follow what we've seen in our parents, right? So then that is now shifting, and we're the ones that are shifting it for our kids, you know, but that shift takes time, because again, like, I don't naturally see what you naturally see, because I didn't see that.
But that's the clarification I'm making, is I don't naturally see it because I just was born naturally seeing it.
No.
Even people that are, so if you're looking at a relationship, if you're looking at a relationship and it's out of whack in terms of what someone is capable of, I'm putting bunny ears with that person that's the more capable person wasn't capable in that space initially. They had to learn too. And I feel like, especially when you become parents, I saw this a lot in the parent groups, the early parent groups we were a part of. A lot of dads, generally speaking, did not know how to look after their babies the way that the mums did. And you could see the systems, and that's what Blair's whole work is around this, but you could see the systems in place that helped bring mums up to speed on how to raise a kid. And obviously things like breastfeeding and that kind of thing, like, gave them a very, very swift entry to that point too, that dads don't have. But anyway, there's these systems in place that brought mums up to speed, but the dads were left behind. And so then there became this massive gap, because the dads are like, I don't know how to do that, and you know how to do that, so I'm not going to try. But there was an attitude between the couples that was interesting to me, because for one thing, the dad would be like, I don't know how to do it. I don't want to feel dumb, like you've said, so I'm not going to put myself out there. Then also, a lot of the times the mum would be like, expecting them to know what to do. And when they missed things or when they didn't want to try or when there was some kind of insecurity playing out, the frustration at that, which just contributes. It's a massive mess, basically, is what I'm trying to say. But the encouragement in that is none of us knew what we were doing until we started to learn what we were doing. Even if it was just from childhood and we were kids raised in this space, yes, we've got the upper hand in terms of we've been doing it longer, but we still had to learn that. So if you're in a relationship and there's a mismatch in that space and you're the one that's like, I just feel really stupid that I have to learn these things now. Like it feels like such a general tiny thing and I don't even want to go there because I just feel stupid to have to learn how to look after a house when I'm 30 something years old or something like that. We all had to learn those things. So there's so much grace there. I'm trying to encourage that this is possible. I'm encouraging the people that feel incapable in that space. It's possible for them to learn. Everyone had to learn. I'm also trying to encourage and challenge the people that already are functioning in that space to have grace and a gentle approach to bringing them into that space when there's willingness to learn, because that will be the biggest thing, the fastest way to get people more on board and get people more enabled in that space rather than having kind of an attitude of you should have known, you should be able to do this.
Yeah.
And the last one is
make a repair attempt early.
Yeah. And this is really, really practical. So I love this one. Basically, when things start to get tense, when you see that slippery slope heading towards that communication loop, a small repair attempt can stop it from escalating. And a repair attempt is a small thing that you're putting out there to see if you can quickly put a little fix in. Things like a quick joke, lightening the mood, being like, all right, we're getting there, let's lighten the mood. Or physical touch, if your partner responds well to that. Just to clarify, some people would be really not happy for physical touch in that time.
Yeah.
Especially depending on the topic. Saying things like, I know we're both frustrated, but I love you and I want to work this out. And we've seen that before as well.
Yeah.
Like there's been times where we've been like starting to loop and then it's like, I love you. I want to talk through this and find a way through it. And sometimes that includes being like, right now is not a good time to do that. Let's come back to it. So those are some of the practical ways that you can break free from some of these communication loops you might be finding yourself in. They're things you can implement yourself, or they're things you can discuss with your partner, and you can both be on board with implementing these things as you go forward as well. So just to quickly summarize, it was pause and reflect, change the script, try the thankfulness reset, ask a curiosity question instead of assuming, and make a repair attempt early. So that's communication loops.
Nice. Yeah. Looped it in.
We're going to do a new little segment now. This segment is called the Reality Check Corner. So Reality Check Corner is just kind of breaking that, I think it's fourth wall. I don't know what it is, something in the theater, breaking that fourth wall so that we're interacting with you guys in a practical way that's going to impact your lives. And there's going to be a few little segments. We're going to iron out how that goes as we go into the season. But this week, we're going to start with some stuff. First is a prompt that I want us to think about, and I'd love you guys to think about it as well, because as we say often on this, you can hear these things and be like, oh, that's so good for this person, or, oh, that's so right. I know this relationship's like that, or, oh, that's an interesting piece of information, but it's separate from ourselves. And we really want to be encouraging this curiosity we've been talking about and reflecting on it for ourselves and encouraging you guys to reflect on it for yourselves. So I've just got a little prompt here that I'd love for you to take some time today, even if it's right now and you want to pause it, or you can do it later, to just reflect on and almost like do a pulse check on where you're at in your relationship. And the prompt is, think about the last 3 disagreements that you've had. What was the common denominator in all of them? What is one thing that you personally do to keep those loops going? And just sit with that for a moment. So think about the last 3 disagreements you had with your partner, and what was something that is similar between the 3, like an attitude, a situation, a tone, whatever it might be. And then what is something that you're implementing into that keeps that communication loop spinning?
Yeah, and if you want to be going along with this exercise with someone, again, go over to our Patreon, become a chatter. This is the sort of stuff that we're going to unpack together on Patreon as a community over there, because we want to be, again, more than just a podcast. We want to go beyond just your ears. We want to, grow with you. These are things that Amy and I will discuss on Chatter's episode. We've also put an option out there for live video calls as well, for a group of us to catch up and chat. So again, if that's something you're interested in, go over to Patreon.
The next one is a little challenge for you that you can decide on your own to implement into your relationship today. to help shift some of these attitudes. And it's called the 6-second look challenge. So at some point today, pause for 6 seconds and just look at your partner. 6 seconds doesn't sound like long, but it feels like long.
1, 2, 3, 4. That's actually taking ages. 5, 6.
I thought you were about to ask what came after 3.
No.
We once did a challenge. We started to do it. I think it's like 10-second kiss or something like that. Do you remember that? And like to kiss your partner for 10 seconds. And it was actually so much longer. We're like, oh. Anyway, this is just look at your partner for 6 seconds. So you can just pause at any point today when you're interacting with, especially if you've got kids, you can just be these ships in the night and not really interact. Just pause without saying anything, without looking at your phone, without doing anything else, and just look at your partner for 6 seconds. And while you look at them like you're really seeing them. They're not just your spouse or your co-parent, but a person with dreams and struggles, insecurities, with a life outside of you, with thoughts outside of you. Like look at them for who they are for those 6 seconds. And then let those 6 seconds remind you why you're with them. So just reflect. Are you doing that to me right now? I feel like you're doing the 6 second
I've so
thing
done it right now.
Oh
I'm like, I know exactly what we're talking about in chatters now.
All right. So just that can be at any point tonight, even if it's they're brushing their teeth while you're getting into bed kind of thing. You just be like, look at him brush his teeth. All right. And the last one is kind of what we referred to earlier, which is called a future pace in the coaching world. But it's this projecting what you want out of life so that you can feel and borrow from that vision stuff today, the feelings of it, the motivation from it, the direction from it to implement into your relationship right now. So I'm just going to read something and it's going to be very brief. You can close your eyes if you want to, or you can just really think about this. I want you to actually physically visualize yourself in that place and think about the smells, the sounds, what you see around you, little details, even like what kind of grass is growing on the ground or what kind of art is on the wall, whatever might be happening. Get as clear as you possibly can about this picture, because the more clarity you have about that, the more you can borrow from that to influence your approach today. So I want you to imagine that in 6 months' time, your communication has completely transformed in your relationship. Whatever that thing is that you are thinking about today, the loop that you get caught in, that has completely transformed in your relationship. And when you talk, you both feel seen and understood and respected. How does that change your day-to-day relationship? Picture what that changes. Picture what the family looks like, what the vibe in the house is, what your drives together in the car is, what your times together on date night might be, how you talk to each other, the smiles or facial expressions you give each other. Picture what that would look like if those things had shifted for you. And then I want you to ask yourself, what is one small thing you can start doing today to move towards that vision in 6 months' time? So borrow those feelings, those things you want, borrow that from that future into today and what you want to be doing to make that future possible. So that is the end of the reality check corner.
Love it. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to going through it on the chatters episode.
I think there's some like little tiny movements every day. It's the same with exercise. Like we don't just like go from nothing to 100 running a marathon. You do little bits every day to build up that muscle. And even if you are the only person in your relationship doing this, you're not just doing this for someone who's not engaged and not wanting to be there. You're doing it for yourself as well. So my encouragement is every single person can implement these things in a way that can bring a constructive approach regardless of the outcomes.
That's good.
One last quick thing to finish off on. Would you rather?
Oh, let's do it.
Would you rather have to start every argument by singing your point in opera style, or have to settle every disagreement with a game of rock, paper, scissors?
Oh, what was the one? By settling
every disagreement.
Oh, yeah. Rock, paper, scissors.
We do rock, paper, scissors in our house a lot for the kids.
For the kids, when they're arguing, it's like, like on who's first. It's like, all right, rock, paper, scissors.
And it works so well for them. And they're like, okay, well, rock, paper, scissors said. Yeah. I think rock, paper, scissors, but then I'm thinking about some of the disagreements are a bit more serious than rock, paper, scissors.
Yeah, I know, but I think it would still be like...
It would bring a levity to it. Yeah.
I feel like I wouldn't want to have an argument if I had to opera sing it. Like I would avoid the argument. Well, maybe that's good then. No, you're right. And it would also make too much light of the disagreement if you're opera singing. Yeah. Cool. All right, guys. Well, thanks for being here. Good chat. Yeah. Thanks, guys. We'll catch you later.